Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. The Taiwan Affairs Office of the State Council held a press conference on Wednesday morning emphasizing the cooperation between the mainland and Taiwan on cracking down on telecom fraud. Will the two sides continue to work together after the DPP leader takes over the leadership in May? Meanwhile, Taiwan has been facing pressure on the legitimacy of attending some international meetings. How should we view the challenges to the cross-strait relationship if the new leader in Taiwan were to renege on the 1992 consensus with the mainland? To discuss these questions and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Zhongho Tao, a research fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Gregory Yin Zhang, a Taiwan Affairs commentator. We shall also talk to Joanna Lei from the Chonghua 21st Century think tank in Taipei. But before we begin our discussion, let's look at this.
Another phone fraud case within the month. Police in Guizhou province arrested 62 people, including 10 from Taiwan, for committing the biggest telecom fraud case China has ever seen, worth nearly $18 million. Police said the fraud was masterminded by Taiwanese who recruited people from the Chinese mainland to make fraudulent phone calls from Uganda. Earlier this month, 45 fraud suspects from Taiwan were deported by Kenya to Beijing. On April the 16th, Taiwan released 20 telecom fraud suspects deported by Malaysia, citing a lack of evidence. The differences between the two legal systems have also added fuel to the fire. The chairperson of Taiwan's Kuomintang party, Hong Xiu-chu, said the pan-green camp shouldn't use populism to raise confrontation across the strait. On May the 20th, Tsai Ing-wen from the Democratic People's Progressive Party will be inaugurated. Tsai pledged that she would maintain the status quo in cross-strait relations. Beijing's precondition is that she accepts the core of the 1992 consensus, which is that the two sides of the Taiwan Strait belong to one and the same China. However, the world still sees a resurgence of tensions in cross-strait relations. On April the 18th, a Taiwan delegation was asked to leave a high-level meeting at an international steel symposium held by the OECD Steel Committee and the Belgian government, which issued a protest to both the OECD and Beijing. Last Wednesday, the US Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives passed a bipartisan measure to reaffirm the 6 assurances to Taiwan. The guidelines were put forward by former US President Ronald Reagan with the purpose of consolidating US support to Taiwan.
Gentlemen, let's first of all put aside the individual issues about the wire fraud across the Taiwan Strait pending investigation. Now, how difficult is the issue about Taiwan, the cross-strait relations? Many of our overseas viewers may not be able to understand or grasp the complexity concerning the cross-strait relationship, which is so important for what we call peaceful rise of China.
The Taiwan issue is not as difficult or as complicated as you imagine. It is quite simple. The bottom line or the red line, red line is just one China principle. If you could understand this principle, then you could understand almost everything that is related to Taiwan issue. And here I want to emphasize that if Taiwan side could abide by 1992 consensus or abide by one China principle, then the two sides across Taiwan Strait could discuss everything, including Taiwan's status, including Taiwan's international activity. Everything could be discussed, and the Chinese mainland could make reasonable arrangement for Taiwan side. So the Taiwan issue is quite simple. Just abide by one China principle. That's okay.
Why it seems, Gregory, that issues concerning the one China principle, which was first reached in 1992, flare up again in debates across the Taiwan Strait, particularly for the mainland authorities to take a second look at what Chairwoman Ma Ying-jeou is likely to achieve through perhaps the inaugural speech on May the 20th.
Of course, in the last 80 years, when Ma Ying-jeou was in charge, we don't have such a problem because Ma Ying-jeou is the one stated clearly that Taiwan would obey this 1992 consensus. The variable introduced into this complexity is actually Tsai Ing-wen will be in charge a month from now, after May 20th. She is an unknown factor. In the past, she advocated to China statement. She also has a party that has a Taiwan independent clause in its chapter. And also during the time of a campaign to win the election, she also said something like that to get the votes from the extremists on the left side and also some middle road voters. Nevertheless, she's now, when she's in charge, she's facing reality. I do not expect her to make drastic moves. She may have some concession to make in her speeches coming May 20th, but I do not believe she will go down the drain all the way, declare Taiwan independence or change the name into Republic of Taiwan at all. So I'm rather guarded, optimistic toward the future events.
Thank you very much. Let me cross over to Taiwan, where our local commentator Joanna Lei, former legislator of Taiwan, would give her comments. Hello, Joanna. Now, the spokesperson of the mainland Ministry of Public Security has issued an official statement that the suspects would be investigated and prosecuted in accordance with the mainland law after the Taiwan delegation visited the Beijing detention center, where 45 Taiwan residents had been deported to the Chinese mainland from Kenya. Now, do you think... now, let me first of all clarify one thing before you give your comments. It seems the Taiwanese delegation has made some concessions about immediately taking back those 45 Taiwanese. Now, why has such a compromise been made? The compromise is, of course, very different from the position that they made public before they headed for the mainland.
Well, certainly because Taiwan's public opinion has turned about face after more of the facts were known, primarily because they now know that these people are pretty much telecom fraud suspects rather than free people already tried by Kenya court, and that's a very important difference. Initial response was propped by misinformation, saying these are free men being deported to mainland China against their will, against the sovereignty discussion. However, later on, people do understand that they did not get tried in telecom fraud in Kenya. They were only tried by using illegal use of telecom information. In addition to that, in terms of jurisdiction, because the act of crime is in Kenya, most of the victims are in mainland China. So these two jurisdictions pretty much take precedence over the nationality issue or the claim made by Taiwan politicians. So it is very clear that even Tsai Ing-wen and her new team has refrained from making any further comments, and they stopped commenting on rescuing, quote unquote, these people back to Taiwan immediately after the fact is known, because most of the Taiwanese do consider telecom fraud a heinous crime that should be prosecuted by law.
Yeah, many in the mainland who follow the process of democratization in Taiwan acknowledge that the rule of law has taken root in Taiwan. So it shouldn't be a big surprise that DPP is keeping quiet on during the process of investigation. But Dr. Zhong, what is the legal groundwork that guarantees the successful repatriation of the 45 Taiwanese suspects from Kenya to the mainland? Do we, for example, has Kenya signed an agreement with the mainland about whatever legal cooperation in the framework of Interpol?
Yeah. The Chinese mainland and Kenya are diplomatic partners, and the two sides have signed extradition agreement. So for this agreement, the Kenya should send or deport those suspects to Chinese mainland. So Kenya is not a diplomatic partner to Taiwan. So as for this, the Chinese mainland hardly press Kenya for its abiding one China principle, and I think this is an international practice for in future. I mean, in future for other countries, if they find or arrested some suspects, I mean Taiwanese suspects, they should follow this practice. That means first send those suspects to Chinese mainland, and then to prosecute those suspects by Chinese mainland.
Right, Gregory and Joanna. China and Taiwan have abided since 2009 by the Cross-Strait Joint Crime Fighting and Judicial Mutual Assistance Agreement, which formalized criminal justice cooperation and established a procedure for each other to return the other's citizens in legal cases. What does that mean?
Well, actually, this agreement signed in 2009 has started a good cooperation across the Taiwan streets, in China and Taiwan. For example, when this crime, which is conducted elsewhere in third location, but the victims are primarily from China, they also previously residents in Taiwan were also hurt. So this case should be looked at straightforward as a criminal act. It is not a political event to be interpreted otherwise, to kick back and forth. I'm glad this time, I think DPP and Tsai Ing-wen included has come to their senses, knowing that this is something they cannot do otherwise. Hopefully this would be treated as such to have these people punished, to prevent the chance for them to act again as criminals. So this would be a good start for Tsai Ing-wen to start her May 20th administration, because it's a good beginning. Every good beginning is a good beginning.
Joanna, are you optimistic about having such a good beginning before Tsai Ing-wen takes office on May the 20th?
Well, I think in the last 6 years, we've set a lot of precedents. The joint arrest and indictments of criminals exceeded 7,000 people, and including 4,600 also from Taiwan. So in that sense, the joint cooperation has shown a lot of results, especially by law enforcement officers. I think in the Kenya case, the reason why Tsai Ing-wen were able to take an about-face decision is that the jurisdiction issue is quite clear. Most of the criminal acts were conducted in Kenya. Victims were in mainland China. So even if you wanted to bring them back to Taiwan for trial, Taiwan actually has no legal grounds to try them. Therefore, it is this kind of real rule of law sense that persuaded the DPP to say, all right, let's take a supporting role. Let's support their humanitarian rights in terms of family visitation. Let's support them by providing legal assistance so that these Taiwanese can be tried fairly and openly in mainland China, rather than yield to a public outcry to bring them back to Taiwan to trial, because there is no ground for them to be tried in Taiwan. I think this pragmatic approach is a very useful approach. I agree with Gregory. The more we step into sovereignty and one China, the more trouble we get into. If we stay within a very clear rule of law framework, especially established by international law enforcement officers, then we can gradually, pragmatically move forward in joint cooperation against crime and protect innocent citizens across the Taiwan Straits.
Could I add something to that? This seems to be a blessing in disguise, because Taiwan community has realized in the past the rules and regulations govern criminal cases like this. They were let go very easily. For example, those who returned to Taiwan last week, the next day they were released. Or for later on, they get rearrested for other investigations. So this triggered awareness in Taiwan. For example, I read the commentators and many columnists in Taiwan. They have only one voice. We have to change our law. We have to do something drastically different from the past. Make sure these type of criminals are punished. They deserve the punishment. So this could be a beginning of change to the better.
Thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Dr. Zhong Hotel, Gregory Inian Zhang, and Joanna Lei. We are discussing cooperation across the Taiwan Strait about cracking down on telecom fraud. We'll be back in a short while. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Well, of course, the KMT, currently the ruling party in Taiwan, criticized the DPP for manipulating populism in taking advantage of the politics here. Having said this, yet another major event generated front-page stories across the Taiwan Strait. Representatives from Taiwan on April the 18th were asked to leave a high-level meeting at an international steel symposium held by the OECD Steel Committee and the Belgian government. Taiwan's foreign affairs official argued that Taiwan and the mainland had participated at similar meetings in the past and had cordial exchanges. What's wrong with this meeting, particularly in Brussels? Why did the mainland delegation asked the host country to ask the Taiwanese delegation, regardless of the very friendly cooperation that took place before?
Actually, this is a saying distorted by Taiwan media. The Chinese mainland did not reject Taiwan delegation. The only reason for Taiwan delegation to be rejected is that the delegation members' level was too low. So they should not participate in this high-level meeting. After Taiwan's delegation changed their members, to ask some high-level officials to participate in this meeting, then Taiwan delegation was accepted. For this case, it could prove that the Chinese mainland is showing its willingness to its goodness to Taiwan side, and as long as they abide one China principle, then they could do some international activities in international community.
Could I add something to that? Of course, as I understand, this meeting is supposed to be party by states with statehood, so Taiwan doesn't have that qualification. Nevertheless, there's a growing area. For example, if the United States and mainland China are willing to support, they could be brought in as an observer or listening in and so on. In this case, when the host decided Taiwan is disqualified as a participant, I don't think China would not necessarily stop that. So that's to say there's always a potential there for Taiwan to participate in international organizations or international forums with the blessing of mainland China and the United States to have a much better future.
Joanna, do you think authority and seniority of the Taiwanese delegation is the matter? What is the thing that really matters for this spat between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait?
There's an old saying about a person visiting three bears. One bowl is too hot, another is too cold, and the third one is just about right. The level could be too high or too low, depending upon the interpreter and the particular situation. Of course, in Taiwan, this is a very rude awakening. It has long enjoyed a participation in this conference for a long time, and this is the first time in recent history that the Taiwan delegation were asked to leave. So I think it's not surprising that it does arouse a lot of public discussion and outcry, but I think the rude awakening is probably quite important for us to know at this point. That is, after May 20th, after Tsai Ing-wen take office, she will be responsible for building a strong and mutually respected relationship with mainland China so that Taiwan's international space is continued to be enjoyed by both the ruling party as well as the people. And this is a new discussion that's probably currently undergoing in her new cabinet groups.
Still water, quiet water runs deep across the Taiwan Strait. Don't you think the U.S. government has noticed the dynamics in the cross relationship? By dynamics, I mean, of course, we see the quiet mounting tensions in the cross relationship. Therefore, we saw representatives of the House in the United States issued their position about reaffirming their support for the 6 security assurances for Taiwan. Now, can you brief us on the historical context within which the 6 assurances were first released in the United States and by the United States?
Okay. That happened in 1982. At that time, the Chinese mainland was willing to sign agreement with the United States named August to Munich. But the United States want to reassure Taiwan side, so at that time President Reagan sent just an oral message to Jiang Jingguo, and it named several items. For example, the United States will not set up a date for termination of U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, and the United States will not consult with Chinese mainland on U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. So in later, the fact proved that the United States betrayed their promises to Taiwan. From these rounds of arms sales, U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, we could find United States almost discuss or consult with the Chinese mainland. So, and another point, the United States promised Taiwan that it would not mediate between Taiwan and Chinese mainland, but actually the United States, as you could find, is now and this almost always is mediating between the two sides, especially now, just because the United States is worrying about Tsai Ing-wen's cross-strait policy.
And Tsai Ing-wen was summoned to Washington to
Exactly.
brief lawmakers about what's going to be the main contents in her cross-strait policy.
Could I add another point to this
Yes,
situation? I think this happened in 1982 when President Reagan gave this oral commitment. Now the Congress, this Foreign Relations Committee passed this resolution to make it more formal. It's a restatement. It's nothing new. Basically, is to make sure that Taiwan would able to receive the military.
No, it's nothing new, but it's brought to the media attention this time.
I agree.
Around, in such a high-profile manner.
But I do not interpret this as two things. One is to back up the Taiwan independence movement, because that action is contrary to the U.S. interests. So that's not at all. Second is to give Tsai Ing-wen a blank check to put the figures in. That is not true, because Tsai Ing-wen may become a troublemaker. The only reason for the Congress to act as such, because the United States, as you know, White House has its own approach. The Congress, State Department, opinion leaders, they all voice opinions at
And the
different
Pentagon
cases.
has the military-industrial
Correct.
complex.
So this particular assurance is not that serious at all. It's not something drastically different from the previous commitment. So you should not interpret it as a drastic change of U.S. policy toward mainland China or a warming up relations between the United States and Taiwan. It's just something that happened.
However, Joanna, people in Taiwan became extremely concerned and worried about the restoration of diplomatic relations between Gambia and mainland China not long ago. Do you think this has delivered an early warning to Taiwan that should Tsai Ing-wen fail to accept the 1992 consensus about one China in her inaugural speech on May the 20th, then more troubles are likely to occur? And therefore, the United States, from its perspective, would deliver its own message to both sides. Look, you got to be very careful, okay? The United States, of course, is not willing to be dragged into whatever conflicts between the two sides. As a result of Tsai Ing-wen's defiance, what do you think of this allegation and the perspective in examining this current tension in cross-strait relations?
Well, certainly whenever we talk about cross-strait relations, United States is always a party to it. In terms of the Gambia case, I think the communique was really clear. It not only talked about one China policy, it defines which is the legal representation, legal government, and where Taiwan stands vis-a-vis mainland China. So it is by far the clearest statement to Tsai Ing-wen. On the other hand, I sort of agree with Gregory to a certain extent that U.S. Congress will only act on its best interests. That is, United States is safeguarding its best interests, and right now, with the Obama government, its best interest is to have United States having a re-entry into West Pacific. In other words, the repivot idea is still being executed in the current situation, and whatever they state in Congress, it is not to protect Taiwan, nor is it to interfere in cross-strait relations, but to protect the best interests of the United States. And probably they do feel that with both Obama and the lurking Donald Trump, the Congress needs to make its position known at this particular moment. But I think it's important to also know that Tsai Ing-wen, through her mentor today, has declared that she will not address 92 consensus. And of course, this is indirect, but through her mentor, Hu Zhengsheng, Hu Shengzheng, she declared that she probably will not talk about 92 consensus in her inaugural speech, but she'll make a statement that will please both the United States, Japan, and mainland China. I don't know how she plans to do it, but this is her most recent status.
I just want to add one point, that is just as you said, the Chinese mainland has taken some measures, or in some, for some commentators, the Chinese mainland is oppressing Tsai Ing-wen. And I think these measures have created some positive effects. For example, in the past, Tsai Ing-wen did not recognize or accept the 1992 consensus, but now at least she recognized 1992 meeting. Maybe in future she will accept 1992 consensus, but not its core meaning. And maybe maybe in longer future, she will accept the 1992 consensus and its core meaning. So the Tsai Ing-wen's cross-strait policy should be divided into 3 steps. The first is now accept 1992 meeting, and then 1992 consensus, and last 1992 consensus and its core meeting. That is one China principle.
I do hope Tsai Ing-wen has the wisdom in her forthcoming inauguration speech on May 20th to say something like this, say one China, maybe 2 systems or 2 jurisdictions, but would not say anything drastically to offend her supporters. But she should know this because she's the one supported by those people in Taiwan leaning to independence. Even if she says something, soften up her position, she's still the best candidate for them anyhow. But by doing that, she'll do 3 things correct. Number 1, to make nice to feel there's nothing wrong happen, so you can feel at ease. Also, the Taiwan would be in a position to interact with mainland China economically, socially, and otherwise, to make sure Taiwan economy would go stronger, maybe give Taiwan more international space to maneuver, and then, of course, the people in Taiwan would be gratified of the success, hopefully in the next 4 years, managed by Tsai Ing-wen. So I hope she will make some statement rather than stay where she is for the time being.
Now, Joanna, do you think that Tsai Ing-wen will be wise enough to deliver something that is very palatable and acceptable, of course, for the mainland? Because otherwise, the economic outlook for Taiwan would look dim, and that would be something like a price that she has to pay. Do you think the economic issue and economic outlook of Taiwan is likely to be held hostage by her ambiguity in accepting the 1992 consensus?
Well, certainly there may be grave consequences for her to deal with if she failed to make a statement that make all parties satisfied. However, I think it is very important to note that Tsai Ing-wen has already successfully lowered expectations from everyone. Now people do not expect her to come full out to recognize the 92 consensus like in November 7th when Xi Jinping and Ma Ying-jeou met in Singapore. They no longer expect her to do a full embracing of the One China policy. They are now saying, okay, as long as you make some progress, we will probably be okay. Well, that's a very different position from only 3-4 months ago by keeping a radio silence. So Tsai Ing-wen is a very seasoned politician. She's advised by senior people in Taiwan, including Li Denghui. So
okay,
I
thank you very
she's
much,
trying
Joanna.
to
Thanks a lot for being with
as
us.
much maneuver as possible.
With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue. I'm sorry for running out of time. Until next time, goodbye.